full of drums.
Now we have something very different here now. Mr. Chris Gregory, who is going to read or tell us about his new book, which is ever so much worth buying, because you've got a big pile of them at the back and you don't want to take them home. So you can get a signed one here afterwards. And I guarantee that there will be a rush to that table after he's finished telling you all these things. Put your hands together, please. Chris Gregory.
Hello everybody. Bob Dylan is the gift that keeps on giving, as we know, and I talked to John the other day. He's just been to the Beacon Theatre in New York to see him. Aren't we all jealous, of course? But if any of you have heard some of the recent shows, which I suspect most of you have because they're all on YouTube, they are absolutely amazing. Here is this guy, he's 80 years old, and he's going out and he's doing nearly all new songs. And Bob Dylan's a contemporary artist. You go and see a Bob Dylan show, it's not a nostalgia trip. It's challenging, isn't it? Some people walk out because why isn't he playing just like a woman? Why isn't he playing Blowing in the Wind? Why isn't he doing all these things? Well, this is part of the reason that I wrote this book, which is Determined to Stand. I'll talk about in a minute as to why it's called that. Before I talk about this in detail, just want to start with a song. I've got a couple of songs to play here, and this one... First of all, just apologise for some of the technical mess-ups here. Something might go wrong. What I really hope is that nobody phones me during the show, in which case they'll be having a performance, having a conversation with lots and lots of people. So, just going to begin, listen to a song from a recent show. I think this is at Bloomington a few weeks ago, and I'm sure you'll recognise the song. Thank you, Bob. Yeah, got to hurry on back to my hotel room. Going to wash up my clothes, scrape off all of the grease. Going to turn my back on the world for a while. Going to stay right there till I paint my masterpiece. This version of When I Paint My Masterpiece, which is a song that's evolved greatly over the last 50 years, was originally played in the 2018-19 shows. And I often think this is how he wrote Rough and Rowdy Ways. Took himself away from everybody, scraped off the grease, and went in and certainly created this masterpiece. The book, I wanted to write this book because there are many, many books on Bob Dylan, as I'm sure you know. I'm sure you've read a lot of them, yeah? Read a lot of them, yeah? Yeah? So many of them, you can hardly store them, can you? Useful as doorstops, a lot of them, really. But I thought it was really important for this later work because Dylan's later work is really, really complex and it's very strange. Maybe no one will understand it for the next 100 years or so, but I'm making a bit of a stab to start off. Of course, the songs are full of allusions. They're full of references to everything from many, many obscure folk and blues songs, country music songs, and of course, classical literature, Shakespeare, romantic poets, and so on. And it's all kind of thrown in there in this kind of amazing mixture. It's something that Dylan's always done to some extent, but in his recent work, some of the songs appear to be cut up versions of all kinds of different texts from all over the place. One of the great things about Dylan is that listening to Dylan takes you different places. You know, I mean, who would have ever have heard of Arthur Rimbaud without Bob Dylan? Not to mention many, many obscure blues singers and so on. So that's where Dylan takes us. Dylan takes us on a journey. So I wanted to convey that to some extent. So I thought there's a need for a very comprehensive work on latter-day Dylan, because most of the books really concentrate on the earlier stuff, and that these songs needed a lot of deep analysis. So the book goes into all the songs from Time Out of Mind onwards, in really quite a lot of depth, as I'll demonstrate in a minute. I also felt that a lot of the stuff that had been written about latter-day Dylan was really a bit off the mark. I won't mention any authors in particular, but there are a couple you might have heard of that are pretty famous that don't really learn to like later Dylan, which I suspect is, them self-appointing themselves as kind of judges of his work, or they don't really like a bit of change. Of course, if you go and see Bob Dylan today, you won't, and if you're what we call a greatest hits person, you won't. You know, you'll probably be very disappointed. You won't see a guy with a harmonica rack singing all those old songs, of course, will you? Okay, so I also felt that, so I felt these songs needed really serious kind of, analysis, which they hadn't really had. One of the other main themes of the book is Bob's spiritual quest. Now, as I'm sure you all know, he had a brief period where he discovered Jesus in the late 70s. And there's been a lot of debate over the years as to, what does Bob believe in? As if you could kind of summon that up in a sentence. And, there are some born-again Christian writers who insist that every single thing he writes is some kind of coded Christian message, and he's really still born again and just pretending not to be. Well, I don't believe that. I think Dylan's sensibility is much, much more complicated than that. I think the Christianity is part of the picture, but if you look at what he's referring to in these songs, he's referring to stuff from all over the place, as I said. So there's also a lot of writers write about Dylan's later work, and they say it's all about death. Death? Is it really? Is this incredible form at 80 years old? I think Dylan's songs are about life, yeah? An example is Not Dark Yet, which, he only wrote when he was 56 or something, which is probably younger than some of us, isn't it, really? I think. And, it's not really a song about death, I don't think. And if you look at Time Out of Mind, that was generally thought, he's going to die soon, so he's released this album full of these dark songs. what these songs are really about, which is something I kind of discovered when I was writing the book, is about inspiration. It's the search for inspiration. Now, few people would deny that in the 1980s, Dylan wasn't on the top of his form, was he? Some people might. Anybody think that? No? Anybody say Empire Burlesque is his greatest album? That's not, is it? So, what happens to Dylan after he moves away from Christianity, certainly born-again Christianity, he has a kind of spiritual crisis. Now, for Dylan, spirituality and inspiration are the same thing. He comes from the tradition of the Romantic poets, yeah? And, you know, for him, if his spirituality is low, his inspiration is low. So, my book is kind of exploring how he rediscovered that spirituality, that inspiration. That is the spirit that kind of moves all these songs, I think. Yeah? A song like Not Dark Yet is about a kind of spiritual death, really. Now that's the kind of death he's talking about. That's the kind of death he's waiting for. And Time Out of Mind is a triumph of actually rising above that, working through the blues, of course, which is, you know, the medium he's adopted in great detail in his later work. So Dylan had a kind of spiritual crisis in the 1980s where he was producing very, very poor work by his standards. And he talks about that a lot in the wonderful memoir, most of which is made up, of course, Chronicles. And he describes these various revelations that he had. Of course, he describes these revelations about 10 years after he actually had them. Whether that really happened or not is... you know, is a big question, like a lot of Dylan's pronouncements. He's playing with us a lot of the time, isn't he? He's playing with us when he's performing on stage. He's playing with us when he's doing interviews, in particular. And the title of the book is actually... try and get the right quote here, if I can get it. The title of the book actually comes from an interview that Dylan did about 10 years after it's supposed to have happened. I hope I can find the place here. I did mark it carefully earlier, but for some reason, here we go. And this is what he said. He's talking about this is in 1997 he's writing about this. He's talking 10 years earlier about a gig he played with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers on the 1987 Temples in Flames tour. It's almost like I heard it as a voice. It wasn't like it was even me thinking it. I'm determined to stand, whether God will deliver me or not. And all of a sudden, everything just exploded. It exploded every which way. And I noticed that all the people out there, I was used to them looking at the girl singers. They were good-looking girls, you know. And like I say, I had them up there. Sorry, it's a bit hard to see this. I wouldn't feel so bad. But when that happened, nobody was looking at the girls anymore. They were looking at the main mic. After that, I sort of knew I've got to go out and play these songs. That's what I must do. Now, obviously, this is probably a very fanciful, and he's really, again, playing with us. The idea that the audience had all come to look at the girls on stage, and he had them on stage because he felt insecure. Well, I mean, you can believe that or not believe it. But this statement about determined to stand whether God will allow it or not is a very ambiguous statement, of course, but it is a kind of Dylan's rationale for the never-ending tour. So as well as being fascinated by these amazing new songs, with this amazing new form of songwriting that he was doing, I was also fascinated by the idea of the never-ending tour. And as this is a Dylan and Grateful Dead weekend, it's very appropriate to say that it was very much the Grateful Dead, with Dylan's playing with the Grateful Dead in the late 80s, which of course was completely slagged off by all the music press. However, Dylan seems to have imbued something from the Grateful Dead, which is about a lifestyle of touring. That's what you do. You go out on the road, you dedicate yourself to it, and that's what you do it. There's a passage in Chronicles, which you may know, where he claims that when he was rehearsing with the Grateful Dead, he walked out randomly into the street and saw an old blues singer. And suddenly he had this revelation, yeah? Dylan tells us these stories and we can accept them or not. But the point is that it seems to me that he sees the never-ending tour, this amazing constant touring he does, as a kind of spiritual path. He is determined to stand, he's determined to keep going. He's not sure whether God's going to like it, he's not sure whether it's a bad thing to do or a good thing to do, but he's going to do it anyway. And there's another famous quote he says in which he says, I don't find my spirituality from priests or rabbis or anyone like that. I find it in the music. So that's very much the heart of this book. It's about a kind of spiritual quest. And that's kind of led Dylan back, I believe, to the kind of inspiration that he had when he was younger, but from a very, very different angle. So we're going to play another live recording, presuming this wonderful technology works. And I'm going to read quite a long section from the book after this. And this is the version of my own version of You, again recorded at Bloomington a few weeks ago. And yeah, Dylan's themes are very much about creativity. But Dylan is really funny, isn't he? Isn't Dylan funny? You know, this is what a lot of these critics really don't get. He's actually really funny. So there's actually 2 chapters in the book about Dylan's humour. I think this is one of his funniest songs ever, but it's also about creativity. It's a kind of... well, I'll talk about it in a minute. Here's the song, my own version of You, recorded quite recently. Yeah.
All through the summers, into January, I've been visiting malls and monasteries, looking for the necessary body parts, limbs and livers and brains and hearts. I'll bring the song to life. That's what I want to do. I want to create my own version of you. It must be the winter of my discontent. I wish you'd taken me with you, wherever you went. They talk all day, and they talk all day. Not for a second I believe a word that they say. I bring a summer to life, someone I've never seen. You know what I mean? You know exactly what I mean. I take the Scarface Patino and the Godfather Brando, mix up in a tank, get a robot commando. If I do it right, and with the head on straight, I'll be saved by the creature that I create. I get blood from a cactus, gunpowder from ice. I don't chew cards, and I don't throw no dice. Can you look at me with your sightless eye? Can you cross your heart and hope to die? I bring the summer to life. Feel, someone who feels the way that I feel. I studied Sanskrit and Arabic to improve my mind. I want to do things for the benefit of all of mankind. A sage in the willow tree, don't weep for me. I'm saying the hell with all things that used to be. I'm getting into trouble. I'm gonna hit the wall. No place to turn, no place at all. Julius Caesar did. Bring someone to life. In more ways than one. It don't matter how long it takes. It'll be done when it's done.
I'm actually going to stop that there because I'm a bit conscious of time, and it is very long, and I'm sure you've all heard it before, haven't you? Yeah? Good. Okay. So this is what I've written about my version of You. In my version of You, Dylan assumes a comic gothic persona in a song that can be seen as a kind of manual for his late period songwriting. By the time Rough and Rowdy Ways was released, the fact that his songs were partly constructed of quotations from and references to other songs, works of literature, and even obscure informational texts had become common knowledge. Now he turns this method of reconstruction into a far-fetched fantasy full of sharp one-liners. There are echoes of the surreal logic of early comic romps such as Bob Dylan's 115th Dream or Tombstone Blues. But as the narrator becomes more crazed and megalomaniacal, the song takes on a sombre and ambiguous tone. It is packed with allusions to Gothicism, Shakespeare, the Bible, and classical literature, along with knowing references to popular culture. With his tongue very firmly in his cheek, Dylan presents himself as a Dr. Frankenstein figure engaged in a search for body parts, which he declares he will soon assemble into a new creation. The music resembles the incidental filler in old horror films or TV shows dealing with unknown forces, such as The Twilight Zone or The X-Files. The repeated monotonous chord sequence is led by an ominous bass pattern, which accelerates towards the end of verses. In style and tone, it also recalls Screaming Jay Hawkins' famous supernatural Hellraiser, I Put a Spell on You. You know that song?
Yeah.
Anyone give us a quick...
I put a spell on you.
Thank you very much. Right, okay. Halloween, isn't it? This is a Halloween song, really, isn't it? Thank you very much. Yeah, okay. The song has a variable verse and chorus structure, which Dylan uses to build up and release tension. Each two-line chorus begins with a variant on the narrator stating his intention is to bring someone to life. The second half of the first line and the second line are different in each case. 2 4-line verses are followed by 3 8-line verses. But more 4-line verses and one final marathon 20-line verse. This unpredictability helps to maintain a distinctly edgy ambience as we are drawn into the meandering narrative. The first verse immediately established the ghoulish ambience. Dylan's near-whispered, semi-spoken vocal and the macabre, alliterative lyrics create an effective, icy, mad scientist tone. It sounds as if he is licking his lips in anticipation. All through the summers into January, I've been visiting morgues and monasteries, looking for the necessary body parts, limbs and livers and brains and hearts. Already, we can tell he's up to no good. The first chorus, I want to bring someone to life. That's what I want to do. I want to create my own version of you, is spookily parodic. The fact that the narrator seems to be addressing a lover, as he does throughout the song, suggests he's rather desperately deranged. The scenario recalls Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo, in which the disturbed protagonist, played by James Stewart, attempts to turn a young woman into the dead Madeline, his dead lover, who he is obsessed with, by making her adopt Madeline's clothes and hairstyle. These Dylan songs make you think of all sorts, as I'm sure you know. The song includes a couple of very well-known Shakespearean allusions. The narrator declares, "It must be the winter of my discontent," rephrasing Richard III's opening speech from Shakespeare's play. The mention of winter reflects on the reference to summers and January in the previous verse. Richard, in Shakespeare's play, is a cackling villain, determined to take revenge on the world for cursing him with a physical deformity. Remember that, Richard III? Yeah, they dug him up recently, didn't they? Yeah. He may be stuck in the snows of his discontent, but the clear implication of his opening statement is that his winter will soon be over. Come the spring, he will enact his bloody revenge. The character has been parodied many times, most notably by Peter Sellers. The declaration is followed by a series of vaguely threatening statements. I wish you'd taken me with you wherever you went, is mysteriously beguiling. But soon it is clear that the narrator is becoming ever more paranoid. They talk all night, they talk all day. Not for a second do I believe what they say, he tells us, without revealing who they are. This is reinforced by the next chorus. I want to bring someone to life, someone I've never seen. You know what I mean? You know exactly what I mean. The music rises in tempo slightly here, and Dylan pretends to sound just that little bit alarmed, placing slight emphasis on the word exactly. One is reminded of one of the key lines of Joseph Heller's hilarious anti-war novel, Catch-22, beloved of so many stoners. Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they aren't after you. The narrative then spirals into comic absurdity. As the narrator begins to explain how his monster will be put together, Dylan delivers one of his sharpest couplets ever. This is the one we really like, isn't it? He goes, I'll take Scarface, Pacino and the Godfather Brando, followed by the deadpan, mix them up in a tank and make a robot commando. This is so funny, not only because of I almost died when I heard that. I don't know about you, when I first heard it. This is so funny not only because of the tongue-twisting diction and the outrageous rhyming, but because it undercuts the narrator's supposedly threatening tone so definitively. The gangster films Scarface and The Godfather and the performances of the lead actors Pacino and Brando are iconic examples of popular culture. Robot Commando is the name of a children's toy from a gameplay book and a tabletop game. But I don't know if any of you have got grandchildren. I've got grandchildren. Who's got grandchildren here? They got Transformers. They got them? Yeah? My grandson's mad on Transformers. He has these trucks and they all turn into something else. So I think this is Dylan playing with his grandchildren, actually. That's my theory. Anyway. So here the reference seems to be a transformer, a popular children's toy in which one kind of figure can be changed into another, just as the narrator is supposedly threatening to transform his errant lover. The next lines twist this all around even further. If I do it upright and put the head on straight, I'll be saved by the creature that I create. Here, the godlike meddling with nature is reduced to the farcical level of the playground. The rest of the verse spirals off in strange and apparently random directions as the narrator vows to make use of his new powers of creation for magical effects. He makes very spurious claims of being able to get blood from a cactus and gunpowder from ice. The so-called blood that appears on a cactus is made up of tiny insects that can be crushed to make cochineal. In Jonathan Swift's great satire Gulliver's Travels, the members of the Grand Academy are engaged in trying to make gunpowder from ice. The narrator also tells us that he does not gamble with cards or dice. Very unusual claim for a Bob Dylan song. Then he seems to address his monster directly. Can you look in my face with your sightless eye? Can you cross your heart and hope to die? Perhaps the monster, like Frankenstein's creation, is only half finished. Cross your heart and hope to die is a common phrase often used by children when they require a friend to pledge allegiance to them. They may also be an allusion here to Shakespeare's Sonnet 18, where the poet enters a dreamy reverie, a world of shadows in which the natural order of things is inverted. When in dead night thy fair imperfect shade through heavy sleep on sightless eyes doth stay, all days are nights to see till I see thee, and nights bright days when dreams do show thee me. It now seems as if the narrator may be talking to himself, as if he is looking in a mirror. He's clearly becoming increasingly desperate. He explains that he's trying to bring forth a creation which is a mirror image of himself. I'll bring someone to life, someone for real, someone who feels the way that I feel. He declares that I study Sanskrit and Arabic to improve my mind. This is actually a direct reference to events in the novel Frankenstein, when Victor Frankenstein's friend Clerval encourages him to study languages to distract him from his obsession with science. The narrator also promises that I want to do things for the benefit of all mankind. This is also Victor's stated intention in the creation of his disastrous experiment. The narrator then retreats into a moment of self-pity. I say to the willow tree, don't weep for me. Weeping willows are a staple of many self-pitying romantic songs, including Blind Boy Fuller's Weeping Willow, Johnny Cash's Big River, in which the narrator claims that he taught the weeping willow how to cry, 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 and the mournful standard Willow Weep for Me, covered by Frank Sinatra in the 1958 album Only the Lonely. The narrator is now apparently in a state of romantic despair. He has no place to turn, no place at all. But then Dylan delivers another one of his distinctly gnomic comic utterances. I pick a number between 1 and 2 and ask myself, what would Julius Caesar do? It's a very bizarre line, that one, isn't it? Julius Caesar was, of course, no defender of the rights of man. His ascension to power brought about the end of the Roman democracy. The reference to a number between 1 and 2 could be read as a somewhat obscure allusion to the binary concept on which all computer operating systems are based. It can also stand as an image of futility, although, strictly speaking, there are an infinite number of fractions between 1 and 2. Bob even makes you think about maths, I tell you.